Hello and welcome to our webinar on law schools and legal careers in a post-COVID-19 world, perspectives from India and the United States. My name is Arya Majumdar and I'm the Dean of Admissions and Outreach at Jindal Global University. I'm joined by a panel from across the world to discuss these issues on legal careers and law schools. I'd like to introduce first Professor Sital Kalantry. She's a clinical professor of law and serves as the faculty director of the Cornell India Law Center. This center promotes the study of Indian law in the American Legal Academy. She's also the director of online education at Cornell Law School. She has a BA from Cornell University, a master's in development studies from the London School of Economics, and a JD from the University of Pennsylvania Law School. Professor Jayanth Krishnan is the Milt and Judi Stewart Professor of Law at the Indiana University Morrow School of Law and the director of the Milt and Judi Stewart Center for Global Legal Profession. He teaches courses on property, the legal profession, legal ethics, comparative law, and immigration. And in addition to having a law degree from Ohio State University, Professor Krishnan holds a PhD in political science from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. We also have with us Professor C. Kumar, who is the founding Vice-Chancellor of Jindal Global University and the Dean of the Jindal Global Law School. Professor Kumar got his master's degrees from Harvard as well as Oxford and did his PhD at Hong Kong University. I welcome all of you on this panel. There's no doubt that in the present event of the COVID pandemic is one that will reverberate for decades across countries. As Thomas Friedman points out in a recent New York Times column, the coronavirus will create a new historical divide, before Corona and after Corona. In a post-COVID-19 world, it is anticipated that the legal fraternity will have huge demands on its expertise. Now, this will not seem to be sector-specific or even country-specific, but could well be a transformational wave seen across continents, uniform in its spread, much like the virus. There are a number of areas and a number of questions that emerge out of this expectation. I'm going to ask our panelists these questions one at a time, and we will go through their discussion and their conversation. And if you who are listening in or watching us, if you have any questions, do jot them down on the app next to you, and we will try and answer as many questions as we can later on in this webinar. So let me start with Professor Sital Kalantry. Professor Kalantry, law graduate employment rates dipped in the 2008-2009 recession. Now, post-COVID-19, some of us do expect a recession to happen, not just in the United States or in India, but across the world. Should we expect worse this time around?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for organizing it, Professor Majumdar and Vice-Chancellor Kumar, Professor Krishnan. It's a pleasure to be here, and hello to everyone who is online. I think this is a really important questions and really exciting and interesting questions that you at the Jindal Global Law School are raising. I think that to answer this question, of course, requires a crystal ball that none of us have, but everybody hopes that we have. All of this really depends, as we know, in how long we remain closed, how and when we open, how we open, and when there's a vaccine, right? So how long this all continues is honestly at this point, even in the United States, it's hard to tell, and it might be patchwork for us, different states doing different things. China's doing something different, India's doing something different, but clearly globally, as you say, there'll be an impact. So there is, I can tell you what's happening now with our students. Our students at Cornell typically, maybe over 95% will work at large law firms, possibly do some clerkships, and then go to those employment rates. So far, what they've been told, they have not been told that their dates are changed, the ones that are starting in October. Some of the summer interns have been, their dates have been delayed to a month or so till June. So what I see happening is that unlike the last recession where these big law firms, they did a lot of layoffs, what the law firms are doing now is sort of equally distributing the pain and saying it's only fair that instead of telling students we won't hire them, partners will take pay cuts, right? So they're taking 20% pay cuts in associates. So you might see a very different comeback. And even when we come back, there's going to be pent up, demand for certain legal services.
Right. So, Professor Kalantry, you're suggesting that some of us have learned our lessons from the 2008-2009 crisis, and that we are better prepared now than we were, let's say, 10 years back. Professor Jayanth Krishnan, I wanted to ask you a question that is actually doctrinal in nature. I mean, as lawyers, we've been hearing this term force majeure quite a bit nowadays. Do you think the term, now, and we agree that the term force majeure usually is relegated to boilerplate clauses in contracts. Do you think the term force majeure will now acquire a special prominence to solve various claims and deals?
So thank you again, Arya, for having me, and thanks to the Vice-Chancellor. It's great to see my friend Sital Kalantry here too, and thanks to everybody who's attending today. You know, it's interesting because I think that Professor Kalantry has really answered the question about where we're going in terms of employment in a very similar way that I would tackle it. Regarding the force majeure point that you raised, Arya, I think it's right now it's so much as just unknown. I mean, right now we don't know when we're going to get a vaccine. We don't know what employment rates are going to be like down the road. One could imagine that the longer the crisis goes on, the more that people who are engaged in deals that might go south may end up triggering force majeure clauses. And so I think you know, that's arguably the worst type of case scenario for contract litigation, for issues relating to mergers and acquisitions, cross-border transactions. But my own sense is right now, because so much is unknown, specific answers to questions such as the one that you have given, I think it's a terrific question. On the one hand, I think we need to be cautious and we need to be prepared. On the other hand, I think there's an issue about whether or not we want to actually cause a panic. And I do think that the landscape is changing. It's evolving. If we look at the market, the legal market as a whole, I mean, post 2008, 2009, law firms across the board in the United States had about 10,000 people who were laid off. I think Professor Kalantry is correct. The way right now law firms and legal employers are addressing the crisis and employment issues is different. We've already started to see many big law firms cutting back salaries, but there is this sense that essentially trying to keep people on the payroll is the first and foremost priority. And so I think that relates to your question, because the hope is that we can actually keep deals together as well, and so that we don't have to invoke clauses like the ones that you mentioned in order to preserve financial security. So it's a very long answer and a long way of saying right now, we just unfortunately don't know. And my sense is that we may end up coming back to that response multiple times during this conversation.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Jayanth. That was indeed illuminating. I want to move from a doctrinal question to a more pedagogical one. Now, across the world, schools and colleges and law schools have all moved online. We're having online classes to cover up for us for our semester. Now, in a typical law school, which uses the Socratic method, that is, getting the students to answer the questions that have been posed, how do you see the Socratic method translating into online teaching? This question I'm going to pose for the entire panel, but I'd like to hear from Professor Raj first.
All right, thank you very much, Arya, and wonderful to see my good friends Jay and Sital from the United States. Thank you for joining us relatively early on a Saturday morning. You see, at the end of the day, all of us are facing an uncertain situation. We were not prepared for it. At least I would like to confess that most Indian institutions are not prepared for dealing with a scenario of this kind, where we need to fundamentally alter the way education ought to be given. And for a fully residential university campus in which we pride in the fact that we have a fantastic faculty-student ratio, we pride in the fact that learning happens not only through communications and engagement between the faculty and the student, but also through tutorials as well as small group classes and seminar type courses and electives combining together. In that context, I think this is a situation that which universities are prepared with what we're facing. So I would like to say that every university, without exception, need to recognize that they need to respond to it. At the same time, I think necessity is mother of invention. Those of us who were not probably doing online learning before have begun to accept and recognize the importance of having serious engagement in online teaching. Those of us who might have had ways of recognizing that there's only one way of engaging in a classroom need to be more flexible, adaptable to the emerging situation. And I think universities have, to a large extent, responded to it. But I must confess that it does clearly create a range of inequalities when it comes to opportunities for creating learning experiences. No doubt about the fact that universities which tend to have better resources and people who are in a position to create that online platforms are able to deliver their education. And on the student front, there are students who are going to be possibly affected by the fact that they may not have good quality internet, or for that matter power supply and things like that. So a lot of these things are problems that a good part of the developing world will face and need to respond to it. I want to essentially end by saying that this is the moment when we need to provide a lot of assurance to our students. A lot of our students across the country and around the world are facing a lot of challenges, a lot of uncertainties about their future, a lot of anxieties about what is going to be the case for their own future. The graduating students are thinking about jobs. And as Jay and Sital said, while firms can do what they can, I also believe that there will be limitations when they, at some point of time, they may end up taking the hard decision of delaying hires. They may even, retract offers. All of this are indeed possible. I want to say that this is a time when students should think about advancing their qualifications. Crises of all kinds, including recessions, have always had students coming into universities, drawing upon their inherent aspiration to equip themselves for the future. And I'm confident that we will indeed overcome this crisis. While we may not have a timeline, lots of indications are there. For the students who are watching this show, I'm sure you are familiar with the fact that just 2 days ago, we came to know that Oxford University scientists have announced that maybe, and I say this maybe, in the next several months, by late this year, they might end up finding a vaccine, and we might have millions of vaccines available for a large number of people. Almost 40 plus similar experiments are happening across the world. So I want to end by saying that hope is important in this. At the same time, preparedness and flexibility on the part of institutions to create different ways of learning experiences for the students will give them greater assurance.
Right. Thank you very much, Raj, for that. I'd like to turn to Professor Sital Kalantry now, and the same question to you as well now. How do you do cold calling on an online basis? Does that really work?
So we have, as everyone else, transitioned to online education, and it's been about a month. all of a sudden professors who never had used a webcam, some of whom had started to do it. And I think we've learned very quickly of what works and what doesn't. I think there are some benefits to online education. One is sort of time flexibility, but also if you're in a big classroom, you might not see your professor, but here on Zoom, everyone is close up, the professor can see the student. So there's in some ways a more intimacy than a classroom than one would expect. And I think, one needs to create new norms as how do you raise your hand? Not everyone talks at once. You have to make sure that the students, I personally think it's important for their screens to be on. Some students find a way to sort of, or will blank their screens. So I need that engagement with them. So I think Socratic has to be, the point of Socratic method is to, the idea is that you ask, randomly pick on a student to ask a question about a case so that you're preparing them to be an oral advocate and you're ensuring also that they've done their reading. I think that is doable and maybe it has to be a little bit modified. I think what might be most successful, when I taught contracts, I would randomly call on students. I had note cards and would just flip the names. But it might be a little bit alarming or hard for a student when they're in their home to be on that spot, and then they worry that, wow, my big face is in front of 100 students. So maybe create a panel or give them notice in advance. Look, today is going to be your day to speak. I think that could allay some of their fears and concerns in doing this. So I think it is very much doable, but we have to think about the modifications and think about all the benefits of online education and be aware of the format in which we're delivering it.
Well, thanks. So effectively, what we're doing is we're taking an established method of teaching and we're simply making a few tweaks and changes to it. Jay, would you like to add something to this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I currently teach two pretty large classes. In my property law class, I have 82 students, and in my professional responsibility class, I have something like 85 students. And so we've been using Zoom as our main technology. And in terms of nuts and bolts of how I've been doing it, I've been engaging. I've historically, for the last 20 years, been using the Socratic method because I actually like it. I think what I call it the soft Socratic method. I don't like making people feel stressed or humiliated. That's just not, I don't think, an effective way to teach. And so what I have ended up doing is putting people on call ahead of time, telling about 4 or 5, 6 people that you'll be up, and trying to engage in questions and answers with a group of people, because it is intimidating. I think, as Professor Kalantry said, to be on a screen and not be able to see body language or be able to actually visualize reactions from others. And so it's actually gone pretty well, I would say, all things considered. I also think that, just more broadly speaking, if, you would have told our faculty and maybe Vice-Chancellor Kumar's faculty or the Cornell law faculty 2 months ago, we're going to be moving entirely online. And we have to do it pretty soon. I think most faculties across the globe would have said, this is going to take at least 2 years. And we've been able to do it we sort of the royal we've all been able to do it over the last month. And so to that extent, I think it's pretty remarkable. And what I think that shows is that there's likely an opportunity to think about more creative ways now of pedagogy. We've seen faculty be able to adapt and be nimble. And even, those of us who have been kind of nervous about what this experiment's going to be like, I think for the most part, the students have been wonderful. They've been understanding and kind, and they themselves have been adaptable. And so, I think when Vice-Chancellor Kumar said that we're in a new world, I think that's right. But I also think we're seeing some of the best in people come out now. And I trying to look for bright spots in what's obviously a very difficult moment. And here is one way, at least, that I've been able to, see some optimism from both teachers and students. And so that gives me hope. And, fingers crossed that we'll continue on this positive trajectory as we move forward.
Right. Well, thanks, Professor Jayanth. So effectively, there needs to be some kind of adaptability on part of both the faculty as well as the students. And it seems to me that a number of faculty and students are using this crisis to bring forth further opportunities. Now, I want to stick to this idea of using this crisis as an opportunity. Should this pandemic therefore be used as an opportunity to sort of revisit maybe the law curriculum or perhaps the way law is taught? I'd like to start first with the way law is taught and how our reaction as faculty members and students' reactions have been to moving to online teaching. Now, what we're beginning to see is a number of faculty members are willingly putting on recordings of their lectures and then using the time that they would have otherwise spent in actual class to engage with students in a more intimate one-on-one manner. So smaller tutorials, as Professor Raj was pointing out. Now, post-COVID-19, do you think that, and this is again a question open for the entire panel, do you think that this is a trend that will continue to grow? For example, a faculty member who does an online recording for the students to watch at some point in time, which is then treated like a reading text, like a reading material. And then students come prepared, having watched that lecture, students come prepared to a face-to-face interaction or a tutorial. Do you think this is a trend that could continue post-COVID-19? Let me start with Professor Raj.
Thank you, Arya. I think, well, first of all, let me say that, it's important for us as academic institutions, as people who have been in what I call the oldest existing, surviving, flourishing institution of the world, which is essentially a university. And so whenever we think about the future and use the context of a crisis, I do believe that a lot of what we do today will remain intact even in the future. The future university is not going to be dramatically different from what we see it today. And I would like to be that way for a number of good reasons. Having said that, I think universities have been pretty adaptable to new situations and new scenarios, and it will be irresponsible on the part of universities not to be adaptable. So adaptability of universities is part of its effort to engage with the wider community. One of the ways by which the crisis of this kind is going to further, reinforce the adaptability and flexibility and leadership of a university is to recognize the role of what I call blended learning, which does have, just as, for example, a useful parallel would be that, say, 2 to 3 decades ago, for many of us who have studied in Indian universities, for example, most of the time we ended up studying in classrooms almost exclusively. The idea of clinical education had not taken that much, relevance and impact. Experiential learning was rarely promoted. Interdisciplinarity of the kind that our students today experience was simply unthinkable, even almost it would not be even possible. Now today, when you fast forward 3 decades, I do see all of these things imbibed in many institutional cultures, and that's the adaptability. So I would say that the future holds a strong promise for online education. I also think that it does have enormous space for blended learning, but I do believe that, and I would say a very important distinction, professional education on the one hand and undergraduate education on the other, these two aspects of education, I don't expect it to be driven entirely online, while online and technology will play a very significant role. The moment we move into master's education, graduate education, and more specialized areas of education, not so much in medicine as well as in certain those type of professions, there will be a greater online presence. And our law school and our university, including our business school, our School of Banking and Finance, has responded to it. We have established what is known as a Center for Digital Learning and Online Education. We have just launched 2 master's degree programs, one in the Master of Laws, LLM in Corporate and Financial Law, delivered as an online program, and also a master's in Business Administration in specialization in digital finance and banking, again delivered entirely in online. These are the new possible innovations for the future.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Raj. Professor Sital Kalantry, I'd like to ask you about if continuing on the same trend of online learning, and I know that you guys, both you and Professor Jayanth, you're in the States, and that we're talking through the marvel of modern technology. What does this mean for international collaborations, particularly between universities and law schools, where typically we would send, we would accept or send students from other parts of the world to come and study with us, or we would send our students to other parts of the world to study either on a short-term summer abroad program or a student exchange program for a semester, or even a dual degree program. Now, with the advent or the forced advent of online teaching, do you see the space in terms of international collaborations and internationalization of universities, does that change somewhat?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what I see is that we always had this technology for a long time. We had the ability to do this. What has changed is the mindset. And if you just think about this program itself, this webinar could have been done 10 years ago, could have been done 9 years ago, could have been done in February. But now that we're doing it now only because we're in the COVID world. But I still could, it didn't mean, so that's what's I think is interesting, is that people now are more comfortable with Zoom, both domestically, like, yes, I'm using Zoom to talk to my colleagues who are just 2 miles away, but now we're realizing, oh, wow, why shouldn't we be using Zoom to talk to my colleagues that are 8,000 miles away? And I think to give you this example, in 2013 and 2014, I spent a semester in the early days at Jindal Global Law School as a Fulbright scholar, and we taught a global class. So with Professor Ajay Pandey and students in Ithaca, every week we would meet, and the technology, again, like I said, it was there 6 years ago. Every week, students would be projected from video in both places. Then our students came to India and we did field work in furtherance of this mission, wrote a report. They interacted with each other for a week. After online interactions, they worked with each other on a project in detail. So they would have team meetings separately on Skype. So as I'm saying, I hope now, 6 years later, more people feel that they're more comfortable with the technology, that, that there isn't, they're not worried that somehow there's going to be an electricity issue or a bandwidth issue, or we're not going to get this personal touch. So, and I'm continuing next year as well, collaborating with another partner, another professor at Jindal Global Law School, Professor Deepika Jain, to do again a global clinic and global classroom with Cornell next year on how human rights and responses to health, what changes we need to make to health law and health rights in response to the pandemic, both in India and the United States.
Wow, that sounds good. As an add-on question, and here I'll turn to Professor Jay, and now both Cornell and Indiana have been such wonderful friends of Jindal Global University, and the fact that we have dual degrees with both of you. Now, in a post-COVID-19 world where there might still be issues relating to public health, what does that say for our internationalization efforts? What does that say for physical transfer of students or physical student mobility? Do you think that's going to get affected, Professor Jay?
Yeah, I mean, so I do, so long as we're still searching for a vaccine. I mean, I think so much of this is, again, turns on the timetable. Dr. Anthony Fauci, who the world has come to know, keeps saying it's not on our timetable.
He's a Cornell law graduate, by the way. Cornell Medical School.
Law graduate, absolutely. Cornell law graduate.
Medical, I'm sorry, I meant medical. Yeah.
I mean, medical, right? Exactly, medical. Yeah, no, but he's been saying that it's on the virus's timeline, and I think that that's right. And so, you know, issues relating to how we're going to continue these international collaborations are, you know, at the forefront of, you know, people at my center at the Stewart Center on the Global Legal Profession. I know that people like Professor Kalantry are thinking about it constantly. I'll say this, Arya, which is that my own sense is that there is something lost without when we don't have that personal interconnectedness, the ability for students to actually come and meet other students, for faculty to come to Indiana or to Ithaca or to Sonipat. I mean, it's, you know, I don't think there's any denying you know, we're all social creatures, and so we need to be around each other, and the notion of, you know, interacting is a sort of core fundamental aspect of who we are as human beings. So I think something definitely will be lost. I think there's also public policy issues related to how the United States in particular will be handling immigration issues relating to visas. And, you know, Indiana University has a large number of students from China. We have a large number of students from India who come. What will visa issues look like for them over the next 6 to 12 months? I think that's a serious concern for those of us who engage in the international space. But with that said, I think, you know, the issue of moving online, again, I'm trying to look at the positives in this, and part of me is thinking that there is a democratizing aspect to it, which is that with, you know, the availability of technology, with the ability to access people who may not be able to travel, that may also be an opportunity for people to have access to faculty, to have access to resources, to have access to institutions that they may not otherwise have. And so, you know, as someone who loves to constantly engage with colleagues and students from around the globe, and who loves to see my own students experience, you know, what I've been fortunate to have experienced over the course of my time as a student and as a faculty member, there is a sadness right now. I'm not going to confess, I'm not going to deny that. You know, there's a sadness that people who I care about won't be able to interact with people in other parts of the world who I care about. But with that said, I think we have to adapt. And I think using technology and thinking about this, think about these opportunities in an online manner may provide some avenues of opportunities that we haven't thought about in the past. So, you know, with all of these things, it's complicated. And
I'm sure. Yeah. Raj, let me turn to you now.
I just want to quickly react to this issue on internationalization area, if you permit.
Yes.
I think it's important for us to recognize that this is a phenomenon that I don't expect it to last long. And as all of us have agreed, that clearly it has provided a pause on our ability to promote a certain type of internationalization which focuses on faculty and student mobility, physical mobility of the kind that we are talking about. Having said that, the deeper values of internationalization are indeed intact. And if, in fact, if at all anything, we need to and should use this opportunity to advance those deeper values of internationalization, which is A, to recognize that we are all in this together. The interdependence of us as part of humanity, as a part of global community is never been more pronounced than today. Previous attacks and viruses or other forms of natural tragedies, including terrorist attacks at different points of time, have confined to certain countries and regions. but there is this extraordinary situation where the almost most parts of the world have been affected. So there is an element of interdependence. The second, I think it's very important also to recognize that the values of internationalization should enable us to partner with our organizations and institutions as much as we have always done. I think today's webinar, but also many more things that we intend to do, bringing together students and forums. In fact, I would like to see as we launch our own online programs from Monday onwards, we should have forums and exchanges and groups where a bunch of students from Cornell and Indiana and Jindal are talking about what this crisis means to them and how they intend to overcome it and what they see their own future in this. I think so. In some ways, it's important for us to put things in a perspective. There is a certain situation, a moment that we are facing today when certain types of internationalization has been affected, but I don't expect that the core values and mission of internationalization that universities are deeply wedded to and committed to are going to be in any way undermined when we go beyond the COVID-19 crisis.
That's a lot of optimism from you, Raj. It's great to hear that, though. So from moving away slightly from legal education, I want to now talk about the future of the legal of practice, right? So we've seen over the last few weeks that Indian courts have moved online as well, and this is again a novel experience for many advocates, many judges. And as we all know, there's a huge backlog of cases in India. So my question really is in two parts. One is the use of technology, particularly distant technology, in the legal profession going to be the new norm? And if so, can this help in delivering better justice to people who need it? Raj, let me pose this question to you first.
So I mean, this is actually quite extraordinary. I've been in touch with some of our very distinguished judges and lawyers, and they tell me that no less than the Supreme Court of India has been hearing matters and passing judgments on matter orders and directions. The Delhi High Court has been doing it. Lawyers have been arguing. They've been using all kinds of technological platforms, and we all know that this was not a natural journey that the courts in India, particularly the highest courts, have taken. And I think I don't believe that this will be the new normal, but it also shows our ability to be adaptable. I think it's also very important for us to recognize that access to justice as a critical common good needs to be protected now more than ever. The judiciary and courts cannot have a lockout. They need to function regardless of every other crisis type situation. The question is how they are able to deliver justice in different forms. Now, of course, the tragedy in a country like India is that we talked about it before, the inequalities that prevail in our society does get exacerbated in crisis type situations. And so while the higher courts are much better resourced and the lawyers who are involved in this are probably much better resourced, once you enter into the lower court situation across India and the kind of litigants and the kind of issues that come forward, including the plight of, for example, under trials in prisons across India, there is continuing sense of injustice and inability of the institutional mechanisms to respond effectively for addressing access to justice issues. So while I'm quite delighted to see the adaptability of the higher courts to do this, and we need to do more, we also need to recognize that we need to get into a more inclusive approach. And maybe the future will help us become much better prepared and also to put in place systems and resources so that technology can be more effectively used in the justice delivery system and not just during crisis.
All right. Thank you, Raj. We're going to soon start posing questions that have been asked by our viewers. But I just want to close out with one question for the entire panel. So for each of you, and starting with Professor Sital Kalantry, could you give me three key skills that future lawyers will require in a post-COVID-19 world? We'll start with you, Professor Kalantry.
Well, I think that the three skills that they need are probably very similar to the three skills that they needed pre-COVID, I believe. Believe it's very important. You know, I teach clinical education, so I teach people, students, how to be practicing lawyers. Our education needs to change in the United States completely so that at the first year, our classes are not all theoretical, not all casebook based. We need clearly to teach students how to write legal briefs better, how to make arguments in court, how to think on their feet, how to interact with clients, right? So all of the skills needed to be a great lawyer has to start early on in law school, not let's wait till the third year, or no longer can we wait till you graduate in your first year of teaching, right? We don't, of working in the profession, we're not necessarily gonna have that much time. So you get a leg up by doing that. So I think that's a revolution that is beyond COVID that needed to be made in law schools even pre-COVID. So I think that to me, I would say would be the biggest skills they need and the biggest change. Clearly analytical skills, that's something we're teaching with the Socratic method, with the reading. And that they'll continue to need. Maybe technology. I think everybody in this whole world needs to be a little bit more familiar with technology. Like the judges, when you force Supreme Court judges to, use technology, they'll learn. They'll be more comfortable in the future. Everyone will be a little bit more comfortable by being forced to do it. It's like, in a way, what we teach our students to do. You are learning by doing. Now that's what judges are doing through this technology. That's what businesses are doing. So, and students, they're already great at technology. So in a way, we're learning from them. So hopefully that's helpful in answer to your question.
Professor Jay, three skills in a post-COVID-19 world.
Yeah, so I'll just echo what Professor Kalantry said. I mean, to me, aspects of emphasizing aspects of writing, I think analytical skills, I think thinking about alternative arguments, alternative hypotheses, that's all going to be key, even more so today. But it is, I think, what, as she rightly said, those are talents and skills and techniques that law schools have been emphasizing for a long time. I guess for me, I would say that there's something else, and this is really for the students in the audience, which is that so often I hear from students that they want to be an international lawyer, or maybe now in the post-COVID world they want to focus on being an expert on law and medicine, or now that technology is going to be so important that they're going to want to be cybersecurity experts. I guess my feeling about that is something that I've said to students for many years, which is, if you want to be a great international lawyer, if you want to be a great lawyer who focuses on these other areas, intellectual property, cybersecurity, law and medicine, you really have to be a good foundational lawyer. And that means being, skilled in the areas of contracts. That means knowing procedure. That means knowing essentially knowing how to tackle many of the courses that are offered in that first year, whether you're at Jindal, whether you're at Cornell, whether you're at Indiana. I mean, for decades upon decades, law schools, I think, have been doing a lot of things right. That is, that they've been structuring curriculum to essentially view the teaching of law as a building blocks process. And so, to the extent that students want to have specialization, to me, a lot of this really revolves around also having the basics down, and having the basics down cold. And so I would say that is key. But one of the aspects that I constantly stress, particularly to my professional responsibility students, is that the crisis that we find ourselves in, asks all of us to dig deep and to look inside of all of us. And one of the things that, I don't like using this term soft skills. I like thinking about it more as humane skills. But one area that I think that we all need to be particularly more focused on now, given, and Vice-Chancellor Kumar said this, the accentuation of the inequalities that exist between the haves and have-nots that have been highlighted really in this crisis. One of the things that I think that all of us need to be better at is empathy, and how we can really feel as though we can connect with particularly those who are suffering so terribly. I mean, the four of us here, we're all part of the haves. I mean, life is more uncomfortable and it's inconvenient now, but we'll get by okay. I think emphasizing to our students that the world for so many millions right now is very, very difficult and life altering, and how we get lawyers to connect with people in a more empathic way, especially at this moment, to me is, I think that's really going to be the crucial test of what legal educators need to be doing over the next several years.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Jayraj. 3 skills in a post-COVID-19 world?
Well, I share all the things that my friends and colleagues have said. I will first, of course, say that ability to acquire legal knowledge through hard work, there is no substitute to that. That skills, of course, should be always there. Second, ability to read and write and communicate effectively. I mean, the core elements of being a good lawyer, and most of the time you are arguing somebody else's causes, and that's important regardless of whichever area of law you end up doing. And the third is something which I have always believed, and this crisis only demonstrates the importance of it, which is to develop a deep sense of justice that resonates with what Jay had mentioned about empathy. It also recognizes the fact that education is a privilege, legal education is a privilege, and those of us who have gotten it, we have a larger social responsibility to do our bit to make the world a better place, and that recognizes all these inequalities that we are facing. In fact, the COVID crisis, at least in the Indian context, the United Nations ILO report, which was released a week ago, says that 400 million people in India are going to dip into poverty simply on account of the lockdown as well as the post-COVID situation. So these are extraordinarily, difficult times for a lot of people in India and around the world. And lawyers have a very important role to play, because law helps in organizing society, and also it helps in building a society based on the rule of law. And that structures that lawyers will help create need to recognize the importance of empathy and social inequalities, and should attempt to address them.
Right. Thank you very much, Raj. I'm now going to start asking questions that our viewers have asked. And if you're listening to this or you're watching this, if you have any questions, now is a good time to raise them. Let's start with a question that is on pretty much a number of people's minds. Urja Vashisht and Vanini Chabra, both of them are asking, what is the scope of law in terms of the scope of the profession after COVID-19, and which fields of law would be in demand post COVID-19, or let's say 2-3 years down the line. So what areas of law do you think would take on more importance in about 2-3 years, maybe after COVID-19? Let's start with Jay.
Yeah, so, sadly, I think the area of bankruptcy law is going to be an area that we're going to see, unfortunately, exploding. And so I think that that's going to be critical. I also think the area of trust in estates, wills, family planning, those areas of the law, we're seeing actually an uptick in terms of people, essentially trying to gauge what their future financial situation will be like and how they best can plan in the next few months ahead. So I think that those two areas specifically are going to be important. But I also think that we may see within the next 6 to 12 months, maybe a little bit longer, if the economy hopefully will start to rebound. We may see areas that I'm based here in the Midwest in the United States. We may see demand for construction going up, and so that means real estate, property law. We may see, if there is a recovery where infrastructure is needed and workers are getting back to working on important infrastructure projects, we may see areas of the law that focus on those types of deals seeing a higher demand. So I think that's, so at least in the most immediate term, I think that those are areas that we're likely to see potential job opportunities. But again, as I've said repeatedly, so much of this is just going to depend on how this entire pandemic plays out.
Right. All right. Thanks, Jay. We have a question specifically for Professor Sital Kalantry, and Steve Sheth asks, do we have a specific course in the US regarding medicinal law? So does Cornell or perhaps even Indiana, do you guys have a course on medicine and law?
So there are courses, some schools have very specific law and medicine, or really law and health is typically how it's framed. So it's not necessarily that you're getting an MD, but you're studying sort of ethical aspects of health. Many schools do have that. Currently, I've been working in collaboration with our medical school that is based in New York City, and we're in Ithaca on a project on surrogacy. So, and we're continuing our collaboration. We've also been working with the medical school on immigrants. We're trying to, the United States is sort of taking away funding and saying pre-COVID had said, well, you can't really, if you go use our public health services, then we're going to deport you. So in a post-COVID world, that is really, really more problematic than it even was in pre-COVID. So yes, I think there are courses and places that you can apply to that would focus more clearly on maybe joint programs even on health and law. We do have some courses, but I wouldn't say that we're, we specialize in it, but there's definitely opportunities across the interdisciplinary opportunities.
Right. We have a few other questions, let's say from Srinivasa Reddy and KB Raheja, and both of them are asking, how adversely is the legal profession likely to be affected post-COVID? Raj, would you like to take this one?
Let me say that I think it also depends upon the context of legal practice that one is pursuing. There is no doubt about the fact that if companies and corporations are not functioning for a while, it will have a direct impact on their ability to take legal services at various levels. One of the big questions for several of these answers is that to the extent of the damage we are talking about, and that's connected to how long the lockdown will exist, how long the type of uncertainty that we have today will exist. I also want to say that one of the things about this particular crisis is that the ability for the regular dispute resolution mechanisms to come to a somewhat of a halt has created a very different type of scenario for which we don't have a specific date when we will recover from. Having said that, I do maintain that organizations, institutions, individuals, including the legal profession, has enormous sense of adaptability and to reinvent itself. I think from the standpoint of students, it might be useful to say that they should become more flexible about what kind of career opportunities they might want to pursue, what kind of specific interest they might have, be it in transactional work, litigation work, NGOs, not-for-profit, whatever types of areas that they wanted to work. it's important for them to be more flexible, more adaptable to this new environment. And also, I think I'm definitely convinced that when we go beyond the COVID crisis, it will only seek the same type of things that we seek in a good lawyer, which is about competence and abilities and commitment and dedication. So those values that are so fundamental to anybody in any work context are not going to go away, and they will definitely be sought after. So I don't believe that structurally and institutionally we expect the legal profession to dramatically change when we come out of this, although there will be a number of short to medium term implications, particularly possibly in the fees that the lawyers might charge, or the billing framework on the basis of which law firms might function, or the type of compensation that gets paid to young lawyers, or for that matter senior level associates. Some of these changes are already happening, and some more changes will happen in the months and years to come.
Right. Thank you very much, Raj. Yes, Professor Kalantry.
Something. So one of the things I wanted to say is, well, on the small picture issue is that law schools are counter-cyclical. Applications go up in down economies. So by the time you're applying, you're out in 5 years and you're out in 3 years, everything's going to be different, and no one can really predict what will happen. And no one could have predicted in a pre-COVID world what would happen. We didn't know in 2001 that there was going to be a massive internet recession crash. Nobody knew it was going to happen in 2008. So you can't plan. So if today you say, I knew people at law firms that were planning, we're going to do bankruptcy work. And so by the time they became partners, the economy was up and they couldn't become partners because the economy was too good. Nobody wanted a bankruptcy partner. So what I would say to you is to think about what you want to do. What is your passion? What do you love to do? Instead of trying to pursue a profession by predicting the market. And because ultimately that's the best advice. Your career advice to me is, in my own personal life and my own personal career, when I've done things that I didn't enjoy, I was not happy. And now, and I think, do you want to do justice? Do you want to represent clients? Do you want to be in the smartest person in the room if you're doing a corporate deal? Because that's what lawyers are. So it's a question of what you want to do, and what you love to do is what should guide you.
Right, wonderful. So effectively follow your passion and you'll end up being successful no matter what. We have a question from Sneha Pandey, which is quite pertinent. She asks, the world is in a constant state of moving towards a digital platform and considering the ongoing movement towards social media. What's the scope of growth of laws regarding data privacy? Now, we've seen a number of, we've heard of a number of instances of Zoom bombing and of webinar links being leaked out or meeting links being leaked out. Is there a scope for a growth in data privacy laws in terms of the profession or in terms of the jurisprudence surrounding data privacy? Professor Jay, do you want to take this?
Yeah, sure. So I can speak to this a bit. At Indiana, we have one of the leading centers on cybersecurity in the country. And so we have a really talented group of legal academics, but I think the very interesting aspect of this field is how interdisciplinary it is. So people who work in areas of informatics, engineering, the sort of the sciences are constantly interacting with people in the law. And I think it's a huge growth potential for the legal profession. I mean, I think it's a massive area where we need more lawyers. We need more people thinking about issues relating to data privacy. We've always, been emphasizing issues of protecting consumers from, bad actors, and now with the explosion in online technology and communications, I think that becomes even more important. And so I think it's a really important question, and I'm glad she asked it. And I would say absolutely. I think that this is a key growth area for the legal profession. I also think that it's like I said, I think one area that we're going to see cybersecurity come into close contact with over the next few years is how it intersects with intellectual property. And so I think people who are interested in these two areas of intellectual property and cybersecurity, I think the future is potentially very bright for them as they consider their legal careers.
Right. Thanks, Sujay. So we have a question from one of our former students at the Jindal Global Law School, who is now an assistant professor of law. So Shireen Moti asks a number of questions, of which one of them I thought was really, really pertinent. So she asks, how do we keep our students motivated to believe in the process of online learning and using this time to further develop their reading, writing, and research skills? I'm sure this question is on the minds of many faculty members who are possibly watching this, as well as students who are watching this. Raj, do you want to take a first crack at this? How do we keep our students motivated?
Yeah, sure. Well, let me say this, that it's not going to be easy. We will accept that to start with. For those of us who have spent a good part of our life believing in the idea of classroom experiences and what happens within a campus environment, this is going to be a difficult one. So one thing which I think it'll be useful is that develop a strong channel of communication with the students above and beyond the classroom learning experience itself. I think it's very, very important that students, there are different types of students who are facing different types of challenges in absorbing what happens in a classroom environment. It's important for them to be able to at least share their challenges and difficulties. The second, I think it'll be useful is, and which it requires a lot more work on the part of the faculty members, is to be able to provide different types of reading materials, both before class and after class, which can potentially help them to understand and appreciate what happens in a classroom environment. I think normally, it would have been sufficient if somebody is using a PowerPoint or somebody is providing articles and materials, that would have been sufficient. But this might require some more additional availability of materials that happens. The third thing, which I think is very important, is that when we do classes and when we have a typical day, at least at Jindal, beyond what happens in a day in terms of classes, you have lots of conferences and lectures and workshops and seminars that happens, which enriches the entire campus experience. I do believe that part of it, and I'm conscious that we cannot replicate it, but part of it should be brought in. I think students should recognize that they are trying to experience a campus life, but in an online context. And so not only what they do in terms of their specific courses where they are supposed to study, they also need to be exposed to opportunities of learning that happens beyond their subjects and courses through these webinars and these type of things. And this is one area where provision within the timetable structure, but also faculty agency needs to be created. I think lastly, I would say is that a lot of student concerns are in relation to assignments and coursework and grading and assessment and things like that. We have taken a call that we need to be flexible. We need to provide a lot of leeway. We need to be much more accommodative about students' concerns and situations, knowing pretty well that how much ever we are accommodative and also providing flexibility, students might want more. And so we might want to evolve a flexible academic regime, cognizant of the extraordinary situation that we are facing, and integrate that into the online learning experience. As I said, it's a new situation that we are all facing, and when we come out of it, we would have learned a lot, and we should be conscious of the fact that the student interest should remain paramount as we move forward.
Well, thank you very much for that, Raj. I want to continue on the same stream of thought with a question asked by none other than the Vice Dean of the Jindal Global Law School, Professor Dr. Weston Popovsky. And along the same lines, he's asking, and this is a question I want to pose to Professor Kalantry and Professor Jay. How did students respond to the online teaching and the emergency situation? Did they demonstrate a strong sense of responsibility? Professor Kalantry, you first.
Well, I think initially there was immense sadness that we've lost our third year, we've lost our connections to our fellow students. You know, they've been displaced. So, but once we realized that, well, you know, the science is telling us this is what we need to do to protect ourselves, I think people were more willing to step in, and I think people are being flexible. I have a student, I had her actually write for me 10 points for professors, what you would suggest we should do differently. And some of the things, and it's actually been published online now, she suggested was like, just relax. You know, you might have, we know technology doesn't always work. You don't have to be nervous. Your kids might be in the background, but that's okay. That's actually nice. It personalizes you a little bit more. We're all human, and we realize that more so now in this environment than we did. And some of her suggestions were about engagement, goes back to Shireen's question, which is you can use polling in Zoom. You should have, like, you can use Clicker, right? And Clicker software is what we use. There's definitely other software, iClicker, where students can immediately answer multiple choice questions. Did you understand this? Or what do you think is the answer? You know, red, blue, green. And then you have a discussion about that. So there's a lot of ways that good suggestions and to be, you know, like Raj said, to be a little bit understanding of students. And we're all worried about our futures, worried about our health, worried about our professions, worried about our families, taking care of our families now that we have more responsibilities at home. And I think the best way to motivate students, really, again, going to the initial questions, is the students are already motivated to learn the subject. And if you make it interesting for them, they'll continue to do the work they do. So for us, we've now moved to pass-fail grades. But I have students who are working on this project that they went to India to do stuff on the NRC, Assam issues. They're working really hard because they're committed to doing a good job, committed to making a change, know that this is going to impact, you know, the skills that they're learning will impact the lawyer that they are in the years to come.
Jay, do you want to add to that?
So yeah, absolutely, and it's wonderful to see Bess on the call here too. I hope you're doing well, Besselin. So let me just say that my own sort of reaction to how this online experience has gone is that it's gone better than I thought it would. I was very nervous. I've been somebody who's always believed in the interpersonal connections between the teacher and the student, and how, you know, that motivates me and that drives me. And so I was concerned, but, you know, I've been teaching online, as all of us have, for the last 3-4 weeks, and my motivation and inspiration has actually come from the students. I think it's been, at least my students have been absolutely remarkable. I teach 1L students, first year law students, and so they have a natural enthusiasm because they haven't been so jaded by the process, and they have been remarkable. I mean, really remarkable, adaptable, understanding, compassionate towards one another. And so it's been actually a much more positive experience, I think, for all of us than any of us initially thought it would be. I would just highlight 2 points, and the Vice-Chancellor brought this up, and I want to emphasize both these points. One is that I do think faculty are really in a position now of having to play even more of a leadership role in the classroom, because we have to be really concerned, I think, especially in this moment that we're in, and it's something we haven't really talked about yet, but I want to raise it, which is I think we have to be really concerned and sensitive to mental health issues that our students may be facing. I know several students who this has been an extremely difficult moment, and, you know, to the extent that we can help them at least find avenues and professionals who can address many of their concerns that they have, I think it's really going to be incumbent upon faculty members to take a leadership role on that. And then I think the second aspect is we have to also be really sensitive to the fact that, you know, there's a lot of class disparity among our students. And so accessing, for example, just things that many of us take for granted, internet connectivity, is not always so easy for our students. And so to me, that essentially translates into faculty members having to play much more of an assertive role to ensure that everyone in the classroom is learning, that everyone in the classroom has access to the materials, to the instructors, to the resources that they're entitled to, especially when, you know, they're paying a lot of money and they're, I think, rightly demanding a top-notch education. So on those two fronts, I think really the responsibility of faculty members is very, very high. And to remember that, you know, we're really very fortunate. I mean, we have, in my view, the best job in the world. And so to be able to provide opportunities for our students in ways that we may not have thought we needed to a month ago, I think is going to be absolutely crucial.
Raj, we have a few questions that are aimed specifically at you and the Jindal Global Law School and a few other things. So Tanvi Nimje asks, and I'm going to ask you these questions together so that you can give us a joint response. Tanvi Nimje asks, good evening. My question to Raj sir: will the COVID situations deteriorate the level of international internships and placements that the Jindal Global Law School has? Do you want to answer that first, or should we go on to the next question and you can answer that?
Quickly answer the question. Listen, our commitment to promote internationalization is unwavering. We are in touch with our partner institutions. We are in touch with the international organizations and the law firms and others who we work with very closely. The answer is basically based upon certain international law, international regulatory, and national level policies. So long as the countries in which these organizations and institutions are don't have prohibitions surrounding it, these things will continue. But it is only prudent to assume that you can safely let go of the current summer, and we should be looking at the next year. Because not so much because of the fact that any of our partners are even slightly reluctant to do this, but there are major legal and regulatory and visa and other types of immigration related challenges in different countries which will prohibit the possibility of hosting any international student for any purpose in most countries in the world. That's a response to the question.
Thanks, Raj. I have three more questions very quickly. Malvika Nambiar asks, is a BA in International Relations along with an LLB an option at Jindal? Raj, very quickly.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we just actually, by the way, we just launched the BA in Political Science at Jindal just a couple of hours ago through a webinar. And the School of International Affairs has, as you know, a BA in Global Affairs. So both those programs are very good options for our students who want to specialize in these fields. And as some of you know, Jindal Global Law School has uniquely both the 5-year undergraduate integrated LLB programs as well as the 3-year JD type graduate LLB program, and which is designed for students who have completed an undergraduate degree in other discipline. And so if you have studied a BA in Global Affairs or a BA in Pol Science, both of which is offered by the Jindal School of International Affairs, you are very much eligible and indeed well suited to pursue the 3-year LLB at Jindal Global Law School.
Right. Now, admission to the Jindal Global Law School is on the basis of an All India exam or the LSAT, right? Very similar to what we have in the United States. Now, Vanini Chabra asks, is there a possibility that the LSAT India exam goes online? And how will the integrity and value of these tests be maintained?
Well, I don't know whether you have been snooping on the calls that we are having with LSAC and LSAT in the US, but as you can imagine, this extraordinary situation has indeed made us think about the way our exams are. Let me begin by saying that as a university, we have taken a decision that we need to explore these options. So Pearson VUE, which conducts the JSAT exam for admission to all our schools and programs, all the 9 schools, excepting law and architecture, both of which are regulated differently, all other schools, the JSAT examination is going online. And it has already gone online in the sense that you could go to a center, but in the next 2 weeks, we will enable it to be taken from your own homes and online at home. That's the type of innovation that JSAT and Pearson VUE is going to do, and you will be informed about it. As far as the LSAT is concerned, the organization, the Law School Admission Council of the US, has always conducted it as a test, a paper and pencil test in India, and it is set up across different parts of India on 7th June. We have been impressing upon them the need and importance of taking LSAT and making it online this year, given the extraordinary situation. I must say that it does take a lot of effort and time, including a lot of psychometric analysis that goes into creation of a test of this magnitude. I can't promise, but this matter is being considered at the highest level. And if we do end up having such an option, we will get back to you about it. Thank you very much for that question.
Thank you, Raj. Last question on JGU for now. And this actually could be answered by Professor Kalantry or by Professor Jay. Do you expect, but this is being asked by Sejal Mitra, do you expect that online classes to continue even in the fall 2020 semester? So with the new intake, students who are joining your law schools, either Jindal Global Law School or the Morris School of Law or the Cornell Law School, do you expect that online classes will continue even in the fall 2020 semester? Professor Kalantry, shall we start with you?
Again, something that everybody is thinking about. I think that we call it the $64,000 question. I think that's just, we don't know what will happen. It's a pretty, different states are doing things differently. I think that we hope that we're all planning to be in person in the fall. That's how we're planning, but we are always having a plan B. Now, I think what you can imagine is what's more difficult is how do we deal with the international students, because we do have a lot of people from India and China in our master's programs, in our LLM programs, and even in our JD programs. So maybe for the LLMs, there is a possibility of an online component, let's say for 1 or 2 months as the visa issues and the regulatory issues of both countries are being sorted out. So that's sort of I can tell you that's what how we're thinking about it, but and planning to move forward, but then always having a plan B.
Right. Before I move on to Professor Jay, Sital, I just want to let you know that one of our viewers has just written to me saying, this is very last minute, but can someone please convey to Professor Kalantry that I've heard about her book on abortion and feminism and law, and that she looks forward to reading it.
Thank you.
You've got a fan. You've already got a fan within our viewership.
Very sweet, very kind.
Moving back to the question at hand, are we prepared, or are we expecting online classes even in August 2020? Yeah.
So my answer is essentially the same as Professor Kalantry's. I think we are hopeful, but we're trying to be as best prepared as we can. The only additional component that I'll add is that we are also planning to make every one of our classes available via recording. And so we're hoping that we will have essentially our whole course catalog be available online, so that if we have to move to that format, particularly for our international students who want to come for an LLM or another graduate degree, that they'll be able to take courses really with the option of selecting any class that they would like, because all of it will be recorded. So that's the, I think, big move that we're planning and we're preparing for, which I think is kind of exciting, because as I said earlier, now if you're a foreign student and you're contemplating coming to the US, coming to Indiana for an LLM or an SJD, but you can't get here, you have at your fingertips the ability to take potentially any course that you want in our course catalog, online.
All right. So over to Professor Raj. Raj, is JGLS prepared for online classes for fall 2020?
Well, I have always maintained that physical classes, as we understand, is our preferred way of teaching, and we have we are a residential university, and so we expect all students to be on campus. And so, in some ways, all of us, this is not a time for us to predict the future. We should remain optimistic about the scenario that we will all face. I don't believe that the way in which we are positioned today should has any information that we can predict about what's going to happen in August or September. So from our standpoint, we believe that we are getting ready for a physical campus environment in the fall semester. And but as people know, our interrupted semester will begin online on Monday, on 20th April. So we would have got enough experience for managing part of the semester online, as we are attempting to do. And in any case, recognizing fully that online education has its own limitations. And so if the world remains a place where physical engagement of any kind is absolutely impossible, and indeed actually dangerous to the community to pursue, and even illegal, then institutions and universities may have to take decisions that may not be the best interest, but that will be in relation to protecting a larger interest, which is to protect the right to life itself. So under those extreme and extraordinary circumstances, if universities need to make those choices, we will make those choices. But that will not be a choice that we would have made as a part of our preferred choice, but something that we would not have had any control over, the classic force majeure option that you began this conversation with.
Right, wonderful. I think we're almost out of time, but we'll have one last question, and it's a very pertinent one, given the composition of our panel. So Vansh Ganatra asks, does it make sense to do a BA LLB from India and then a JD from the US? Now, I'm going to throw this open to the entire panel, who can then wax eloquent about the advantages of a BA LLB in India and the JD, and perhaps how one can shorten the overall 8-year time period that one requires. Jay, do you want to take this?
Arya, I hope it's not a fake and engineered question by you.
Not at all, Raj. I can show you a screenshot if you'd like, but go ahead. I mean,
well, the architect of this program, both of them are sitting in front of you. So let's have Jay and Sital go for it.
Yeah, well, so, perhaps not surprisingly, I think the answer is yes. I think it's going to be very, very important. I think more than ever, we need people who are skilled in the law. I think that we are not going backwards, but we're going to go forwards no matter, if we remain in this sort of lockdown for an extended period of time. The world is continuing to globalize, and we need professionals. We need people who are skilled in thinking about the law and its evolution in a cross-border manner. And I think at this particular moment, especially given the amount of inequality we see highlighted as a result of this pandemic, there are enormous amounts of legal needs that are simply going unmet. Professor Kalantry mentioned immigrants. Clearly, I think the idea of helping the undocumented, helping people looking to claim asylum, whether it's in the United States or in India, is as important as it is, as it was before, as it is now. I think that's going to be key. I think when we're talking about helping people who are on the lower income scale, who may now effectively be struggling even more so because of the pandemic, we need advocates and representatives of these individuals fighting for their rights. And so I think that pursuing a legal career is as important as ever. As Raj Kumar has long said, being a lawyer is not just about being a legal actor. It's about being somebody who is socially, morally, ethically responsible. It's about thinking of the larger community and what lawyers have to offer for that community. And so I'm very bullish about the legal profession, about legal education, even in this moment of crisis. And so if you're interested in talking to me about the specifics, nuts and bolts of our BA, LLB, JD program with Jindal, happy to chat with you. Feel free to reach out to me offline, and I'd be eager to continue this conversation.
Wonderful. Professor Kalantry?
So in a snapshot, there are essentially three options for students in India who want to study law. If you've done your BA LLB, which is a 5-year program, you can potentially come and do an LLM, which is a 1-year master's. So that's 6 years. Or you can finish your BA LLB and come and do a 3-year JD, right? Because for us, it's a postgraduate degree. Alternately, you can even, I have a student who went to LSR. She did a 3-year degree there and then came to do a 3-year degree at the law school. So it's a 6-year program for us. But what Jay has been talking about is a special program we have, we meaning Cornell as well as Indiana, with Jindal Global Law School. And there's no other school in India that we have this program for, and that's the dual degree program, where students can get their BA, their LLB, and their JD in 6 years. And it would otherwise take 8 years for them to do it. Now, why should they do that? I think, one, if there's some interest in working in the United States, a JD will be a much better leverage for you than getting an LLM. JD, you've understood American law, even though you only spent 2 years in our program, you have taken the foundational classes, you're an American trained lawyer, as well as an Indian trained lawyer. Even when you go back to India and say you want to work for a corporate firm, you'll have clients that are in the United States, and you'll be able to speak the legal language of the United States in a way that you would less likely to do. Even though the LLM, you can do it. I think that is a great degree as well for people who want something shorter. But I think the JD gives you definitely many advantages, and I would for sure recommend it. And our students who are in the dual degree Jindal program, one of them is actually one of our top students. So we're impressed with the students that come in. They have all found different jobs in the US that they have wanted and sought out. One at a firm, one actually as a government lawyer doing prosecution work because that's what she wanted to do. So there's definitely, I think, a great opportunity to do this sort of comparative and international degree.
Thanks so much, Professor Kalantry. Raj, any final comments on our dual degree program with Cornell and with Indiana?
Well, I do believe that was a transformative program that we began with both these institutions and also the University of Arizona College of Law. And I think one of the remarkable things about that particular dual degree program is not only because of the fact that it creates opportunities for Indian law graduates to potentially practice in the US, but it also creates opportunities for these graduates to come back to India and to be a global lawyer in India. One shouldn't underestimate that opportunity, because the idea of transnational legal education in which students who have trained in law in one jurisdiction can actually attain a similar training in another and should be able to be part of a particular jurisdiction, including India, is valuable. And I do say that this becomes even more important when we have a situation where a lot of major Indian corporations are working in international settings, a lot of US-based companies and corporations have strong Indian presence, and Indian law firms, including, are seeking qualifications and experience in a transnational context. So I do believe that Indian law firms, when they are looking for people who have a multi-jurisdictional training, even to be able to practice in India, but do have a possible understanding of the US law, their ability to engage with both Indian and US clients is vastly significant in that sense because of that dual degree program. So I do believe that it's an extraordinary opportunity that Jindal Global Law School offers in partnership with some of the leading law schools in the United States. And a number of students have already been benefited by that experience, having graduated from these programs.
All right, so that's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank all of our panelists, Professor Kalantry, Professor Krishnan, and Professor Kumar. Thank you all for those of you who attended. We hope that this session has been informative and useful, and that you will take away a significant amount of clarity from this webinar. We will continue to do more webinars as in the next few months. Do stay tuned to our social media platforms and our websites, and we will be back with you shortly. Thank you so much, guys. Any final remarks, Raj?
I have a quick announcement to make. Next week, same time, we have another webinar which will be led by, of course, Dean Majumdar, but also the participants and speakers will include the Dean of Cornell Law School, the Dean of Indiana University Moore School of Law, the Dean of University of Arizona College of Law, and the head of Southampton Law School in the United Kingdom, which will be part of a global law school deans colloquium. And I hope many of you, all of you, will be able to join us in that dialogue, which will be held on next week, next Saturday, same time. Thank you.
Looking forward to that too as well, Raj. All right, thank you so much, Professor Kalantry. Thank you so much, Professor Krishnan. It was great having you on board, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.